What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Celestial Compass. We're airing this at the beginning of October, and I'll just update the forecast for the month. I encourage you to read the whole shebang at omtimes.com and my site, empowermentunlimited.net. This is a really critical month. We're in a gear shift between eclipse cycles. It's a highly volatile, anything can happen territory. The new moon on the 14th is a solar eclipse in Libra, the sign of relationships, and it marks a resetting and an upgrade in how we deal with each other in our relationship agreements. Going to play a big role in all of the strikes that are going on, but individually we're moving into a new model of how we relate to each other. So there will be tweaking, changes, possibly some departures, and this will be even more so by the end of the month when we have, just in time for Halloween, the Taurus full moon, which is a lunar eclipse. And this one is the final eclipse in a group that we've been having since the spring of 2021. The eclipses in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, which is the axis that has to deal with money, resources, what we own, what we invest in, how we share, what we get out of what we invest in. And there will be, there's a lot of really heavy Scorpio energy in the sky as this is happening, opposite the moon. And just note that there are going to be huge revelations, lots of drama, lots of endings. Do not freak, because this has been a long time coming. And fortunately, the inner planets all month long are giving us a lot of opportunity to get clear in our thinking, to set up some healthy boundaries, to actually negotiate and talk with each other. And so keep your eye on the ground, on the steps immediately ahead of you, and just take things moment by moment by moment. And by the end of the month, you could be really pleasantly surprised with where you end up. But there will be some doozy moments in between now and then. So today we are going to talk about some really, really fun stuff. My guest is Lisa Greenfield, who founded TruthInHand.com as an intuitive coaching business. She loves to help achievers shift limiting behaviors so you can experience more love and success without painfully repeating outgrown patterns. She is a celebrity intuitive reader who works with some of the stars in TV and film because they know she can identify mental roadblocks by tapping into their intuitive guidance system. When you identify this truth, you begin your journey to an even better life. She doesn't just work with celebrities. She offers intuitive guidance to everyone open to discovering their truth so they can experience more love and success without painfully repeating unwelcome patterns. And she combines a number of modalities. I met her through palmistry, but she also weaves astrology and tarot into her forecasts and work. That's a lot. Now I'll just say, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Kathy. I was laughing as you were reading it because it's like, well, that was truly a meeting of two minds when we got introduced because you're somebody else and your hands say the same thing. That is an investigator. You have to know. So you're going to get to the bottom of something and you're go in any door that's available to you and make the most of it.
And kick some in sometimes too. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So,
I love it.
could you tell us, now there are a number of modalities, as I mentioned, that you work in, but what is your origin story as an intuitive? How did you discover these abilities and then kind of walk into this path of life?
Oh, thank you. I'd love to tell this. So thank you for the opportunity because I come from a family of intuitive overachievers, mostly on my mother's side. And we were not allowed to watch TV as kids, like a half an hour a week. And I think that was the Nature Channel or the Disney Channel or whatever. And we were so aggrieved about that. But we read through enormous amounts of information. And my brother brought home a book on palmistry when I was 13 years old. And I lit up like a candle. It's just like, ooh, this is a place where my intuition about people, because I really got readings on people as opposed to, looking ahead and seeing the future. Yes, we all can sense that, but I was more interested in really understanding people because we can adjust in the moment and affect whatever is coming down the road. So, plus I was going into puberty and loved the idea of being able to hold hands with the cute boys. It's about them, You were a teenager, right, Kathy?
I wasn't looking at palms, but that I can certainly understand why that was appealing to you. Yes.
Want to hold hands with the cute boys. Yep. So I started reading hands in high school, and it was such a great opportunity because my father said, most people, it's not that they don't want to talk to you. It's that they don't know how. If you're different or if they're shy, they may not know how. But everybody's an expert on one subject, everybody, and that subject is them. So if you get them talking about themselves, they're on solid ground and they're going to have an easier time having a conversation with you. So that was a perfect blend of insight into how to meet people comfortably and use the intuition and palmistry for that end. So it's like, it was not a work thing until about 14, 15 years ago. It was always something that I did as a way to connect with people. And connect with people I did. In fact, you said what was the start? Palmistry was the start, but do you want to know how I wound up adding astrology and tarot?
Of course.
Well, when I was in outside sales, I sold people. We did contract staffing, and I got to call on Disney was one of my clients here in Los Angeles, and that's a big behemoth. They were pretty wired against any new vendors getting in the door just because there were so many people knocking all the time. But the woman who headed up the decision making was this fascinating woman who she snuck out of the house when she was 16 years old and danced behind gym doors at the Whiskey, and there was she had a whole list of things, and she had most of the people on the lot, particularly the big names, that knew her by name and absolutely were dazzled by her. And when she found out I read hands, after I read her hand, she goes, She goes, do you know astrology? And I went, no. She goes, well, I'm going to teach you if you want to learn. And I'm going, you could read me the phone book and I'd be interested. She was just such an interesting person. You've met people like that, right? And it's just like, you want to be around them, So it's like, you want to teach me? You want to take time with me? Absolutely. And that was when I understood that astrology actually maps out in your hand. And then I went looking for the books, to back that up. And then I was also, because I was pre-med, and it turns out I have a math block. It's like I'm the equivalent of dyslexic in math, but they didn't know that that happened then. And so, I didn't become a surgeon, luckily for everybody else. But my love in brain biology was always something that I carried with me. And I was studying that, and it maps out in our hands. So now it's like, okay, the brain biology maps out in our hands. And now I got another piece, which is astrology also correlates with the hands. So it's like, wow, astrology, brain biology, and the lines in our hand are all sources of mapping us, and they all frame out who we are. And it's like, wow, right?
Yes, but normally, like anybody who does this kind of work runs into the truism that if something is shown in one way, it shows up in every other way. Like there are multiple avenues to the same
Mm-hmm.
information. So this
Mm-hmm.
makes complete sense that there be these
You know,
parallels.
yes. And well, what the really fun part is, because I, of course, am an investigator, which, by the way, so are you. You've got markings
Hmm.
under Saturn, not the scary markings. That's one of the only places where if you have a star, that's a little bit of it's like, ooh, that's not a good place to necessarily have a star, because, not always, but the indication is that you can be famous with a star under Saturn, but not for good reasons. It's like a Patty Hearst kind of situation. It's like,
Oh,
not necessarily, something that you'd choose to be a celebrity over, right? But back to investigating, when I found out that, we've got our Mars, which is our actions, where that maps out in the hand actually correlates with the region of the brain that measures risk tolerance. So I had the privilege of doing the Emmy Awards for the stunt people, and they had their own party, after the Emmys, and I went, and there was a group of about 14 of them, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity. I said, okay, you guys, I want to run a blind test here. Nobody tell me anything about who does what. I just want to assess your risk tolerance based on your Mars line, So it's like, just, bear with me and let's do it. Well, the second person in was Big Dave. And he looked exactly like that sounds. It's like 6'7", a wall of human flesh, not an ounce of fat on him, standing in front of me. And I'm looking at his hands and I'm going, you're not a high-risk person. In fact, he actually had an architect's headline, somebody that really likes both beauty and precision, and it's like you've got a moderate risk and a real high-level interest in, in like structure. And, then went all the way around. And then the last person was this little spark plug of a woman. She was dark eyes, dark hair, about 5 foot nothing, and I looked at her hands and I went, oh my God, I'm not getting in any car that you're driving. And at that point, because I had gone all the way around, everybody fell out laughing. It turns out she was the stunt double for Mission Impossible. She would do a couple of the stunts that even the men wouldn't do for Tom Cruise. Okay, because she had no fear, absolutely none. And it turns out Big Dave, with his precision, he was a structural engineer that they'd recruited as the stunt supervisor. He was the one who did all the risk assessment. And it's just
perfect.
like it happened that he was this huge man. So it's like Mars, where our Mars is, where that shows up in our hands, and our brain biology married perfectly. Now, granted, it's a small sample, 14 people, but that was, they pretty much said it was 100%. So it's like this all stacks together. This is just more information about us.
So the planetary lines or the planetary placements in the hand,
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really thought of those. I know that the astrological elements can show up in the hand really easily, and that's easy to detect: a fire hand,
Mm-hmm.
an air hand, water hand, earth hand. But the planets too.
Yep. They actually, and they correspond with regions of the brain. So it's fascinating that it's like both the hands and the regions, because the origin of palmistry, they argue, both India and China like to claim authorship. And it's like, it's one of these where it's kind of like, the helmets, the metal helmets and the feathered helmets appeared in the history at the same time, half a world away. I have a feeling that when the information arrived, however it arrived, in the collective unconscious, or whether you believe aliens, shared it with us, whatever, it probably arose at the same, similar times. But they have slightly different takes on it, but they still map out those personality traits and those characteristics that correlate with what the actual neurobiology is. Like a low set little finger. And by the way, these days, a lot of people, their pinky is sitting lower than the other three fingers, noticeably so. And that has to do with a tendon on the outside of your hand that is the fight, flight, or freeze. It's kind of like a boxer stance. It's almost like when that little pinky gets pulled down, it's a sign that you're on high alert. And since the pandemic and the destabilization of the world that we've been living through since then, most people are feeling that. So you see a lot of people with that pinky sitting quite low.
Now that is fascinating. That I hadn't heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I noticed that it's there in your hands. And also you've got one of the farther reaching heart lines. So your capacity is that visionary explorer with your heart line, Kathy. But the darkest part of it right now is sitting in that earth heart, that short and straight, which is a lot of people are. It's kind of like the full extent of our heart is still there, but it's almost like a dry riverbed, because it's almost like our body's going to shock when there's, something physically happens to us and the blood pools in the trunk of our body. Well, that reflects in our hands when we've had a big emotional shock. And I would have to say the world the last couple of years has been a bit of a shock.
And to extrapolate on what you're saying here, just to remind people, your hands change as you live.
Mm-hmm. When you change your mind, you change. When you think, feel, and act on something at least 21 times. That's why they say take 21 days to start a new habit. Well, it's 21 individual repetitions of something that you're thinking, feeling, and acting on in a new way. You're literally sending blood flow down a new neural pathway. And in time, the more energy you give that, the more it changes the direction. And we know that our brains stay plastic. They're pretty malleable well into 70s and 80s. So it's possible for us to change our mind and change the line. The only thing that does not change, and you don't want it to, is your destiny, which is in your fingerprints. And that's formed in utero. It's about 12 to 14 weeks. And based on what's going on in your primarily your mother, but your mother and the interaction with your father, it's how many layers of skin go down on your fingertips to create the print that then gives you your sweet spot, your gift, if you will, your blind spot, and the best way for you as an individual to navigate out of your blind spot and back into your sweet spot.
So these points, these aspects are static. The fingerprint lines are static. Okay.
Yep. They don't change, but everything else, including the shape of your hand, changes as you change.
And not just from weight gain or weight loss, right?
Nope. Well, in fact, one of my fun clients, he sent me pictures of his hands. This is way back when, before Zoom became huge. And he just did a phone, and he had sent me pictures of his hands. And there was no telling from his hands. He had beautiful hands. Turns out he had gone through a health scare, and he had put on like 120 pounds. His hands didn't look like it at all. But we still talked about the fact that he had, and what's called an addiction marker. An addiction marker is simply a way. Addiction is an overwhelm. And this is where we go to something that tries to jam the circuits or shut us off. It's because we don't know how to process. Our ability to consciously process what we're going through is not enough in our understanding to keep up with the shock that we're undergoing. So that's when the addiction marker can show up in a hand. And for some people, it's lifelong. For other people, it's situational. But we talked about the fact that it was more a trauma response than it was his natural setting. And he got back to me, I think, 3 to 4 years after, and he'd lost the 120 pounds, and he was back to his, within 20 pounds of his original weight, once he understood that that was a trauma trigger. And that, we have so much shame around our responses to things when it's like, look, we're doing the best we can. Most people are doing the best we can. And if they know better, they'll do better. Maya Angelou. So I love that quote by her. You do what you know until you know better. When you know better, you do better.
That is a great quote.
Mm-hmm.
I want to loop around just back to something that got dropped. How did tarot end up working into this?
The woman who taught me astrology, the little pixie, who also, what's so fun about this is she taught Tai Chi on the lot at Disney, where there's little squirrels running around, and we were having fun. And it's so funny because she was like 5'2", this little blonde thing, and she would teach Tai Chi, but she liked to explain that it's like what I thought was cloud hands was break the elbow. And what I thought was, the forward thrust was gouge the eyes. And there's, this violent language coming out of this little blonde pixie in a Disney studio lot, and one day she goes, now that you're learning astrology, maybe we should teach you tarot too. And I went, okay, again, I found her fascinating. It's like she just was such a zest for life and such a, bag of contradictions. But she, in fact, I think she gave me my first tarot deck, and she just talked about all of it being symbolism, and that if you are looking at a map, and that's what your hands are a map, astrology is a map, tarot is just another map. And what I love is they did billions of dollars. Seriously, they'll spend an unlimited amount of money to find out how to sell us more things. They found out that if, they've got a commercial for cars and you're not in the market for cars, it's all white noise. It goes into the background. But as soon as you're on the vibration or the frequency of buying a car, suddenly you see those. She applied that to tarot, where it's like you pull the cards that you're in the market for.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, I loved that. It's like that's the information, and in some cases, what's been fun about that is when you approach it that way, it doesn't mean that the card that you get is an absolute. So it's like, oh, this is the energy, this is the frequency I'm tuned into. I get more information about it. Sometimes the information I get about it, I'm supposed to try it on and realize, oh, it's not a fit. And know that you have the ability. That's why I like combining a couple of modalities, and I know you do as well, because it gives people more agency. Mm-hmm. Then they have the ability. It's like, well, if there's a cliff ahead, there's a cliff ahead. But you can decide whether you're going to turn right, turn left, go back, or go over the cliff. And what are your options and what are your resources? You don't always have to go over a cliff, right?
And how do you then take this and weave it into the forecasts that you do at Truth in Hand? Because I have seen some that have been card oriented in addition to the ones for the new moon and the full moon that you frequently do.
Mm-hmm. I like to stack the layers, and then what I do, I try and do an intuitive clearing every time. I would love to say I'm 100%, but I occasionally sit down and just knock it out. But I do the best when I do an intuitive clearing and let the information provided to me give me the road marks that, that stand out, the road signs that stand out for what I'm looking at. And I figure that I try and present it in a way that gives people an invitation so that they can then, it's like, what are they going to do with it? Here's the signs, here's the roadmap. So sometimes it is more tarot heavy, sometimes it is more astrology. It depends on which sign is in front, which one is brightest lit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's very intuition driven then.
Very intuition driven. Mm-hmm. I like to do it as if I'm the faucet, and it's the information that comes through me. And for the longest time, I tried so hard to keep it completely neutral, because it's like I didn't want to taint people with my visual of it. And then I got this, like hammer to the head one day going, you're writing this because of your perspective. It doesn't have to fit everybody. They can try it on like a pair of shoes and leave it on the shelf, but give them enough of your flavor without being decisive that it's like, this is the only way it is, or this is the way it has to be. So that's an important part of being intuitive is, yes, know your filter. We all have them.
And
so
do you have
your
I'm sorry.
Yeah?
No, go ahead and finish. I don't mean to.
Oh, that's all right. No, with radio, it's always a little hard, because it feels like there's just a half a second pause. But no, I don't even remember what I was going to say. So go.
If you know your filter,
Mm-hmm.
You were saying if you know your filter, ...
If you know your filter, then it's not leaking into the conversation. You can manage it.
Very well put. Okay, and with that, we're going to take our break. So hang in, everybody. We'll be back very, very soon. Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Lisa Greenfield of TruthInHand, and she combines palmistry, astrology, and tarot, and a huge dose of intuition. You had mentioned a phrase earlier that I had not heard before, gift markings. Can you elaborate on that? What are gift markings in the hand?
Yes, gift markings are they're symbols that show up, usually stars, but triangles can be as well, and certain lines that show up in a key spot. They're like a kind of a red neon sign that says expanded power here. So it's something that it's definitely, it's fun to have, but by no means, the only thing I want to impress on people is that just because you don't have a gift marking, I've had clients who have been incredibly successful in high profile media careers that don't have any gift markings on their hands. Okay, so it doesn't require a gift marking. And I've had a client who, she had the gift marking for being a storyteller and having a certain platform. It was an Apollo gift marking. And so I said, where are you a storyteller? She goes, I'm not a storyteller, I'm a scientist. And I said, tell me more. She goes, yeah. She goes, I work for, and she named, a major pharmaceutical company. She goes, I translate the doctor's instructions so that all of the sales representatives can understand what it is that they're out there promoting. And I said, so do you do it all by writing? She goes, oh no, I host, I host these classes to educate them. So I said, so you're standing in front of a group of people on a regular basis? And she goes, well, yes. And I said, and you're telling them the story. So you're taking data and you're turning it into a storyline so they can follow it. And she said, Well, yes, I hadn't thought of myself as a storyteller. I'm going, that's a storyteller. you know, so, yeah, it's just funny how we get a filter going where it's like people think it's like you've got a storyteller's line and they automatically think, oh, a writer in Hollywood. And it's like, no. In fact, a couple of very successful writers in Hollywood don't have the storyteller's line. And that has not stopped them from being a successful storyteller in Hollywood. So that's the only thing I want to make sure and impress on people. But it's always fun when you have a gift marking. Like you have an Apollo mark, darling. So you are always going to have an audience. And in fact, what's interesting about yours is it's a line under your ring finger. Our ring finger, interestingly enough, it's the finger of Apollo, who was, the god of the arts. So you've got an artistic layer for storytelling, and your gift marking almost runs off of your hands. So it's like you'll have a platform probably until pretty close to your last breath.
Well, one of the things I do is called storytelling astrology.
There you go. And exactly, you're taking astronomy and the symbolic language of astrology, and you're turning it into a narrative, a story that people can understand, even if they don't understand the exact language.
I always teach my students to look for the through line. So that's using writing language. That makes sense. Yeah.
There you go.
Also,
Exactly.
this definitely describes my non-astrological writing as well, very much so. So, yep.
Well, and you've got a triangle under Saturn. We don't see that very often, but it's this really, clear mark that is somebody you would have been an amazing investigative journalist or a detective or, any kind of researcher. You've got a real nose for getting to the full picture and constructing it out of a lot of different pieces. So
I see that.
I was going to say, you do tarot, you do the cards, you do astrology, you do, music, theater. It's like you've got a lot of different ways that you do your storytelling, right? But you're somebody who's capable of pulling in a bigger picture than a lot of people see, and yet not getting them lost in it. So,
sometimes.
yeah, Saturn has the ability to give structure and scaffolding so that people can carry more information without going down under the weight of it. And you've got a gift for that.
And no surprise, I have Mars conjunct Saturn in my natal chart.
Ding, 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 ding. See, I love it when this stuff stacks. That's right. So, like, of course, so no wonder you've got the action under the Saturn finger. Now, the one thing I would tell you, what shows up in the lines on your hand is the universe has a little twist where you're concerned. You'll set off in a direction, and it is not going to go the way that you thought it was going to go. And there are times when you are really good at going with the flow, but there are other times where you will double down and you will keep trying to go in the direction you originally started, beyond the place where it's a good energetic investment for you.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah. But it's one of those where it's just an opportunity to check in, because it literally drains energy off of your lifeline when it's like trying to push water uphill. So just check your energy on that, Kathy, because the things that you are meant to do, you do so well, and you touch so many people. So we want you having energy for those things.
I know what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I used to say, I resemble that remark. Yeah.
Oh, no, I do. And this actually it leads to picking up another thread that you started with, and I just let it sit there, and that is, what are you seeing these days? I know that you go out in public a lot, and you do see a lot of people at different events. And you mentioned the fight or flight impact on people's hands that you're seeing. Are there other trends in what you're seeing in people's hands these days?
Yeah, people are, it's almost like the visual I got was like a starfish and a clam. It's like the universe is every so people will clench themselves tight, and every so often the universe will give a little tug, and then they clench themselves tight. It's like that fight, flight, or freeze. People are so armored up against the shock of everything that's been going on, and they're trying to stay armored up. And this is where we get, some of the anger, that we see playing out, in different forums. And the idea is that at some point, the muscle of staying so tightly shut just wears out and you have to open up. It's so much more beneficial to start, finding one or two conversations where you can open up safely. And it's a learning curve. It's not going to be perfect, but the more we are meant, we're meant to support each other. We are truly stronger together. And yet people right now are on fight, flight, or freeze. So they tend to be more defensive with each other than they are open and receptive. Now, of course, you want to be selective, but you also want to be aware of the stories that you're telling yourself, because most people are pulling from old data when they assess their vulnerability. Okay, so they're feeling vulnerable 16 years old, or they're feeling vulnerable based on what's triggering them. And I find it incredibly helpful to have people ask themselves when they're having a response to something, the best thing you can do is step back and be an observer for a minute. How old is the me that's responding this way? Okay, so that way you can be present for the younger you, because the you that survives the different things has got so much more power and agency. And I see this as a very rich time for people to discover that it's like, oh, wow, I have more ability to impact this situation than I knew. So then it becomes about acquiring conversations, tools like listening to your podcast, the guidance that is going to support them, like riding a bicycle. It's like, oh, I can ride this bike in this neighborhood and I'll be okay. And so the more they can find people, places, and situations that reinforce the true view of themselves right now, rather than that hunkered down in the clamshell, still so, shell-shocked, that they're going to have to open at some point involuntarily. It's like, choose voluntarily. Be deliberate about it, trial and error. It's like, again, like riding a bike. You fell off a bike a few times, before you got on and rode. So one of these. Go ahead. Yeah.
And what you're describing here is the imperative of the Aries Libra eclipses, which are putting the emphasis more and more and more on the Aries Mars individual end of every relationship equation.
Yep. It really, that Aries Libra is very much about the right use of power in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And don't you feel, because what's your take on Pluto going into Aquarius? Because next year it goes into Aquarius. I keep seeing a horizontal power structure rather than a vertical. What do you see?
Oh, it is collective. It's side by side. It's groups. A lot of astrologers have been using the term top-down power for Pluto in Capricorn, and it's much more like neighbor to neighbor, community to community. Just think about what happened the last time Pluto was in Aquarius. The French Revolution is the biggest example of this, of people taking to the streets and actually, in a positive way, the concept of democracy was birthed during that. So there's a big element of that in our current experience of it. And everyone, we got a foretaste of this briefly earlier this year from the end of
Mm.
March to about the 11th of June. Pluto sat at the beginning degree of Aquarius, and it is just this month, it's stationing direct at 27 degrees Capricorn. It's been hanging out at the final degrees of Capricorn, and it will go back into Aquarius early in January, be there for 9 months, and then scoot back into Capricorn for the last time in our lifetimes. So
Yeah.
we're like dipping our toe across the doorway multiple times. And
Yeah.
that's what it's. I was thinking. I was actually thinking about Pluto and Aquarius as you were describing the notion of agency, because there's always a shift in the experience and expression and location of power every time Pluto changes signs.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I just really feel that this is a time of, we have the ability to learn from our history. Never has information been more easily or readily accessible to multitudes. Learn from our history about the right use of power. Where we get off is when they're trying to use what's worked in the past to leverage themselves one up now. And in Vedic astrology, Pluto's hanging out in the constellation that is the ladder undefeated, which means that the right use of power will always win out. And right use of power is not just for personal gain. It's got to
Oh,
be a me and thee. Hmm.
mm-hmm. Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that Aries Libra axis, it's me and thee.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've also been, and we're just having a little detour here, everybody, but you're going to want to hear this. One thing I've
Of
been
course.
noticing is with the South Node, the old behaviors, what we're moving away from, being
Hmm.
in Libra, which is Venus ruled. Um, I think we're moving away from a behavior that so many of us have spent lives engaged in, which is trying to figure out in advance what's going to happen. And okay, I've got to do this in order to make this happen in this relationship, or I have to figure out what this other person is going to need or want, and I'll position myself like nope, 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 out the window. That is going away. The Aries North Node is much more, oh, I'm going to do this, bam, and then things just change without obsessing over or trying to manipulate or create or control a situation with another person.
Yes. It's fresh eyes. Aries is that innocent, expression of, oh, I want to contribute this. And then the what I love about Libra is it can bring in an understanding of, and what is the impact of that? So it's like, oh, I want to bring this in, and I want to bring it in a way that considers the other person. That I don't change who I am because of them, but I moderate how I interact with them so that there's an open door, as Aries can be knock the door down as opposed to, open the door. So it's like, oh, how do I learn to harness all of that impulse, that enthusiasm, and that Mars line, that Mars is the place where the Mars line is the line that is almost like the top of a wishbone with your lifeline between your thumb and your pointer finger, like the starter pistol, and that it starts there and runs across and ends usually under either the ring finger or the little finger, and that's our actions right now. And that's very much where the eclipses are. And that's the expression of our heart line. Our heart line is that top line on a hand for a reason. And that, depending on who you talk to, it correlates more with the moon sign, the heart. But it's that electromagnetic, tractor beam that when you're in you're doing what you love, or you love what you're doing, or you love who you're doing it with, it's magnetic. But the actions you put around that's where I see the greatest opportunity to change your mind and change your mind if you've found yourself less than happy with the results of the last few years in your relationships, be it personal, professional, family. Although when it comes to family, I'm with the Dalai Lama. He said, anyone who thinks they're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. It's like, yep, Absolutely. Yep.
Oh, now here's a quick detour. Have you
hmm
looked at palms of people who are related?
I have. It's so fun. I love to look at generational. I did a family constellation just recently, and it was really interesting. And then to also see where it's like, oh my gosh, you could see and have them point, see it as well. That it's like, wow, the all the interrelations and the overlaps. It was like the Olympics, all the concentric circles. They all intersected. They had things in common. They were all connected, but they also had their individual pieces. It's so fun. Have you
Yeah,
done
fits.
family charts? Hmm?
Oh yeah, yeah. And then there's always a spot in the zodiac where everybody has something. There are frequently repeating aspects that go through
Yeah,
repeating issues or certain types. There are always really tight conjunctions. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually.
I love that. I love that. It doesn't surprise me at all because it's like, again, you're an investigator and you make so much out of what you see. You've got that big picture. So,
Hmm.
of course, I love listening to your weekly
Ah,
forecast.
thank you.
But it's one of my favorites. And I love how you bring music in too. It's like, yes, Kathy, thank you.
Well, I figure give somebody a shorthand for taking all this information in, and people respond to different things. Some people want, tell me what to do. Okay, there's your homing thought. Sometimes the song, and I will often get other suggestions or nominations for Song of the Week in various places, and then an image, because some people might just want an image of this is how the week is kind of summed up in one thing you can just look for. Yep.
Well, do
Nobody else
you
does this.
No. And keep in mind, we are waves. We are energetic waves. Okay, those the thought and feeling waves are what mark the territory in your hand. They're in your chart. And what I love is that you're pulling in across all the modalities, and your headline, your Mars line ends in the area of practical ingenuity. It's like you have that, the mind almost runs right off the end of your hand. So it's like you've got the thinking placement for the thinking line, which is already very strong. But then it's in a place of you've got that visionary explorer heart line, but you've got the ability to put practical scaffolding around it back to that Mars and Saturn. So it's like, oh, very usable. So it's like people may not even realize it, but the reason they'll gravitate towards a song is because it matches a frequency they can then unconsciously tune into.
Yes. Yes, that is my secret. That's what I'm
Yes,
doing.
yes. And you do it
Hmm.
so well. People don't
Thank
even
you.
realize how many layers go into everything you're doing,
Nope.
right?
Nope. It's a lot of stealth activity going on in it.
Yes, but
Yep,
that's
you've
that
got that.
investigator. I know you would have been a phenomenal detective.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
sort of am. Well, in our
Yes.
brief time, I want to touch on one other thing.
Yes.
You have contributed to a book that I also contributed to, Your Guide to
Thank.
Self-Discovery: 20 Ways to Find the True You.
Yes. I loved that. Thank you so much. You were the reason that I got to be involved in that, and I'm so grateful. Yes.
And you contributed the chapter on palmistry.
Yes. Again, it's a little guide to give people a chance so that they could map out, where it's a little snack. It's a little intellectual snack. Earth Heart. The short straight lines. These are the people who are travelers. Okay, it's like you've got a destination. You're in a hurry. You want to get there. You want to get results. The longer curved lines are more of the tourist or the explorer. It's like you want to take in everything around you.
Raise his
So
hand.
yeah, and that would be, but you've got a long straight mind line, but you've got a long curved heart line. So you're bringing in, once again, you're bookending from one side all the way to the other. So it's like it's a big territory. But that's just, just some little ways for us to understand ourselves better. Just like you did with your astrology piece. It's like, again, it's just these days, if people can have a stronger sense of themselves, it gives them more courage and confidence to make those individual choices as we go into the Aries, Libra eclipses. And the more authentic they can be, the stronger the connections, right? The stronger the relationship.
Yeah, because they're real and not because you've postured yourself a certain way thinking this is what you have to do.
Right.
That's so 1950s and 60s. Oh, God.
That is one thing about Pluto and Capricorn that I'm really looking forward to saying goodbye to is there's a relentless perfectionism, that just feels airless. It's like, that if you have to do it a certain way and you have to achieve a certain thing, and there's just so much pressure that Pluto and Aquarius. Pluto's never easy to as far as starting off, but it's like, but it just feels like there's more space and more breathing room. What do you think?
I would agree with that because Pluto in Capricorn is like hyper. It's conformity or the status quo to the max, and we're certainly seeing that rise. Like, what decade are we in? What century are we in? Really, what is this? And I think when Pluto goes into Aquarius, it's going to be much more progressive and finally feel like the 21st century.
Do you want to know where Pluto? Yes, and do you want to know where Pluto is on your hands?
Sure. Where's Pluto in our hands?
The Pluto region in our hand is in the bottom outside corner, so opposite from the thumb, where the palms, just above where the palm joins the wrist. That's the Pluto territory. Okay.
And there tend to not be lines there, right?
Well, it's interesting. You've got lines there. Here's the thing, honey. You can feel the groundswell of change coming. And this is where you double down on your Mars and Saturn and that Saturn triangle in your hand. So we're going to stack your astrology, Mars and Saturn, the triangle under your middle finger. And then we're looking at Pluto, and it's like, because you actually give yourself the experience of knowing what it feels like to be a little unnerved in the collective, so that you've got this empathy. Yep. Did I hit a nerve?
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, it can wear you out, darling. But that's why I also said what I did about your Mars line. It's like sometimes continuing to try and make something happen that you set out to do is a way of buffering against all of that uncertainty that's swimming in the collective unconscious. But you also have something, there's a square on Jupiter, which is one of those things where you could lose everything and you would be able to go out and replace it. It's like Job, so no matter what you go through, you get it returned to you times 10. So you actually have, a lot of protection. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And with that, we are coming to an end. I really, really thank you for talking with us. Will you tell people where they can find you? Where are you online?
I'm at TruthInHand.com. That's TruthInHand.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter. And I've just started a Substack where we're going to be talking more hands on Substack. But you can find that on my Truth in Hand site. Mm-hmm.
And that's also your Facebook handle too, right? Great.
Yes. Truth in.
Thank you. Well, anyway, thanks a whole bunch, Lisa. And everyone, be safe. Keep your nose to the grindstone this month and just see what happens. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.